What if the laws of physics aren't laws at all, but temporary agreements, placeholders in a system more malleable than we dare to imagine? For centuries, humans have treated reality as something fixed. The ground beneath our feet, the weight in our bodies, the movement of time forward, all givens, immutable. Yet scattered across the history of our world are moments that defy explanation, stories too bizarre to ignore, too detailed to dismiss, and too widely witnessed to be dismissed as fantasy. These are not myths or metaphors. They are events, documented, recorded, and sometimes even investigated, where the world cracked for a moment, revealing something underneath, something unfamiliar, something programmed. These accounts aren't the stuff of folklore whispered around campfires. They are police reports, classified government documents, interviews, footage archived by universities, and medical examinations that ended with no answers. They describe people who vanished and reappeared thousands of miles away in the blink of an eye. Towns where gravity stopped functioning for precisely 17 minutes. Days that looped endlessly, time folding in on itself like a corrupted file. Towns reset like a video game checkpoint. Duplicates of people rendered twice, moving in mirrored sync like a processing error. Floating islands in the sky casting shadows on the clouds, only to vanish when approached. Buildings that dissolved into wireframe outlines, revealing what seemed to be the code behind the structure of matter itself. Each of these moments feels like a glitch, not just a mystery or anomaly, but a break in the expected, a flicker in the system. Taken alone, any one of them could be dismissed as coincidence, delusion, or illusion. But together, they begin to form a pattern, a suggestion, a hypothesis whispered by the impossible, that reality might not be what it seems, that it behaves occasionally like a simulation, and like any simulation, sometimes it fails. The stories we'll explore in this journey are drawn from eyewitness accounts, scientific observations, and events documented with a precision that haunts. But our purpose here isn't to prove anything. It's not to shout into the void with certainty or conspiracy. Instead, it's to reflect, to observe, to ask better questions. What happens when we treat these glitches not as paranormal phenomena, but as signs of something deeper? What if these are not exceptions to the rule, but brief exposures to the rule's true nature? Throughout this 14-part exploration, we'll move from story to story, each one peeling back the veil over reality just a little more. You'll hear of teleporting soldiers, towns that forgot gravity, loops in time that trapped consciousness, and cities that rendered like unfinished software. We'll follow the logic behind the absurd and sit with the questions that science can't answer. At least, not yet. This isn't a horror story. It's not a science fiction tale. It's an invitation to see the world differently, to hold space for mystery, to wonder whether the universe we wake up in each day might be running on something more fragile, more beautiful, and more complex than anything we've dared to believe. So let's begin, not with an answer, but with a flicker. A moment in 1593 when a man blinked and found himself across an ocean with no explanation but a feeling that reality had paused and resumed elsewhere. A glitch in the code, the first in a long, strange series that suggests this world might be running on something else entirely. It began with a blink. October 3rd, 1593, Manila, Philippines. A Spanish soldier named Gil Perez stood watch outside the governor's palace. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that clings to skin and slows breath. He shifted his weight, perhaps adjusting his musket or wiping his brow. A blink, just that, and the world changed. When Perez opened his eyes, he was no longer standing before the Spanish colonial facade. He was in Mexico City's Plaza Mayor, 9,000 miles away. His armor still bore the marks of Manila's climate. His musket, issued by the Filipino Armory, remained in hand. The plaza was bustling, merchants, townspeople, clergy. And all of them, it seemed, watched in astonishment as a man in foreign uniform materialized from thin air. He was arrested immediately. Of course he was. Who wouldn't suspect desertion, madness, or sorcery? But when questioned, Perez calmly described events that had only just occurred in Manila: political unrest, the assassination of the governor, details unknown to anyone in New Spain. He spoke of the transition as something deeply disorienting. Not travel, not sleep. A flicker. A feeling like the world had paused mid-frame, the way a lantern's flame sometimes dims, then flares again. He said for a moment he could see both cities at once, Manila and Mexico, layered like double exposure in a dream. Months later, a ship from the Philippines arrived with news. Every detail Perez had reported was verified: the date, the death, the disappearance. Witnesses in Manila confirmed he had vanished from his post at the precise moment he arrived in Mexico. The Spanish Inquisition, known more for burning books than believing them, launched a formal investigation. Dozens of statements were taken. No signs of fraud, no mental illness, no motive. The conclusion, buried in Vatican archives, labeled the event as supernatural transport. A rare instance where even inquisitors admitted something beyond comprehension had occurred. But perhaps the most unnerving aspect of the Gil Perez case wasn't the journey itself, it was its precision. This wasn't a random fluke. He arrived intact, armed, alert, and coherent, like a file copied cleanly from one folder to another. No delay, no error message. Modern researchers studying the coordinates of his origin and destination found that they form a perfect circle route across the Earth's surface. Geometry, not chaos. It was as if some deeper system had moved him, one that operates on principles more mathematical than mystical. The suggestion? That space itself might be traversed not by motion, but by selection, like choosing a tab in a browser, like teleportation by code. What happened to Perez after that remains obscure. Some say he returned to the Philippines, others that he vanished again. But his story has endured, not because of its strangeness, but because it left behind fingerprints, witnesses, records, coordinates, math. So what do we do with a story like this? Laugh? Doubt? Forget? Or wonder? What if space is not the continuous stretch we assume, but a database? Indexable, searchable, subject to glitches. A blink. A pause. A soldier caught mid-frame, moved like data, dropped into the wrong scene, and for a moment the universe revealed its scaffolding. Not myth, not magic. A system. Interrupted. August 4th, 1969. Taos, New Mexico. The morning began like any other in the quiet town. Sun warming the desert floor, cicadas humming in the dry air, and a blue sky without a cloud in sight. But at precisely 10:47 a.m., something ancient and unyielding gave way. Gravity stopped. Maria Santos was the first to notice. She was in her backyard, hanging wet laundry on a line. A sheet slipped from her fingers, and instead of falling, it floated gently upward, suspended, spinning slowly like a ghost in sunlight. Within minutes, the reports started pouring in. Children leapt into the air and didn't come down. A parked car drifted inches above the pavement until its tires no longer touched the ground. Fountains sprayed water in curling ribbons that never fell. Leaves danced in slow motion. Dishes hovered in kitchens. People stood bewildered, laughing, shouting, praying, until laughter gave way to something else, something closer to awe. Local TV station KQED was filming a documentary in the town plaza when the anomaly struck. Their cameras captured it all, the anchor mid-interview, papers floating past her shoulder, equipment slowly ascending. Off-camera, someone muttered, "What the hell is happening?" A question no one could answer then or now. For exactly 17 minutes, The laws that held the world together loosened their grip. Not entirely, just enough to turn Taos into something dreamlike. Dr. Richard Morrison, a visiting physicist, tried to quantify the phenomenon. He measured objects falling at a mere fraction of their usual speed, 15% of normal gravitational force, he estimated. It was like being on the moon, he said, only stranger. What disturbed Morrison most wasn't the lack of gravity, but the precision of it. The effect was perfectly circular, a 2-mile radius centered on the town plaza. Outside it, gravity worked as usual. Inside, it was as if the universe had been dialed down, as if someone had reduced the gravity setting in a simulation menu. And then, at exactly 11:04 a.m., it ended. Everything fell at once. Dishes shattered. People stumbled. One child broke an arm. The sound of hundreds of objects crashing down in unison echoed across Taos like thunder from a clear sky. Within hours, federal investigators arrived. They took statements, collected footage, and sealed much of it under classification. The official explanation? A localized seismic anomaly. But no earthquake, no known technology, and no freak weather event could account for what happened in Taos. And certainly none could explain the footage. 10 continuous minutes of defiance against the pull of the earth. Years later, some of the footage resurfaced in university archives. The scenes feel almost holy, like watching a dream recorded on film. People floating, leaves hovering, time slowed by something no one could name. It's tempting to write it off, to call it hysteria, a hoax, a trick of collective memory. But the records remain. The witnesses still recall. And the geometry, perfect, contained, deliberate, whispers of intention. What if gravity, that force we trust more than anything, is not fixed but adjustable? A setting, a parameter, a line of code. What if, for 17 minutes in Taos, someone or something pressed pause, slid a dial, and reminded us, even the ground beneath our feet is not guaranteed. A holiday from gravity. A glimpse of the world unfastened. And perhaps a quiet warning that reality is more fragile than we know. It started like every other Tuesday. March 15, 2011. Jennifer Kumar awoke at 6:23 a.m. to the sound of her alarm. She brushed her teeth, brewed coffee, and drove to work. Emails, meetings, lunch at her desk, a fender bender on the way home. That night, she fell asleep to the flicker of late-night television. Then she woke up, same time, same day. At first, it felt like déjà vu, a weird coincidence. But when the same song played on the radio, when the same man jaywalked across 3rd Avenue at the exact same moment, and her co-worker made the same offhand joke about the printer jamming, she knew something was wrong. It wasn't a dream. Jennifer was living the same day. Again and again and again. She counted each iteration. By loop 12, she could recite the headlines, the weather, even the traffic light patterns. Nothing she did changed the world around her. The day snapped back to the beginning each time the clock struck midnight. By loop 23, she had stopped panicking. She started experimenting. Could she affect anything? Would anyone notice if she screamed, ran, broke something? The world around her reset, but her memory remained. She learned. She grew. In a strange prison of time, Jennifer became fluent in Italian. She read entire libraries, tested theories of motion, sketched fractals. She became a scientist in her own private experiment, a lone observer trapped in a broken loop. On loop 31, she discovered something chilling. If she concentrated hard enough, time behaved differently, dually. She could stretch moments, make a coffee break last hours. During one loop, she made the sun hang low in the sky for what felt like half a day. She wasn't just caught in a loop. She was inside something she could bend. Then came loop 45. She met another. Frank Rodriguez, a quiet man who sold handmade furniture downtown, approached her in the park. "You're not new, are you?" he asked gently. He had only lived the loop 3 times, but had noticed the pattern. Together they tested limits. They found that others were beginning to notice too, murmurs in the periphery of consciousness, like the simulation was stretching. They devised a sequence, a set of actions carried out in perfect sync. Jennifer at the fountain, Frank in the bookstore. At precisely 11:11 p.m., they both pressed their palms against reflective surfaces, mirror and window, and whispered, "End." And it did. Jennifer woke up on March 16th. Wednesday. The world had resumed. No one else remembered. But she did. Her notes, scrawled across dozens of looped days, remained intact. Her fluency, her knowledge, her skills, all survived the reset. She contacted a university researcher she'd once confided in. Together, they submitted a report to the Department of Energy, an explanation no one could verify, yet none could dismiss. The conclusion: time, as we perceive it, might be constructed, looped, resettable, subject to errors in execution, like a corrupted file running endlessly in the background of a greater program. What haunted Jennifer wasn't the repetition. It was the sense of architecture, the realization that time could be rerun, edited, and ultimately escaped by triggering the right conditions. It begged a question she couldn't shake. If time can loop, who, if anyone, is pressing play? And how many of our days are truly unique, unrehearsed, and free? Or are we all reliving moments we've forgotten were loops, subtle glitches in the calendar of a simulated world that sometimes forgets what day it is? Millbrook, Illinois. June 12, 2003. A quiet town, the kind with one diner, a public library, and children who ride their bikes in slow loops down tree-lined streets. Nothing unusual ever happened in Millbrook until the day people began seeing themselves. It began with Rebecca Martinez, the town librarian. She was sorting books alone in the nonfiction section when she glanced out the window and saw herself walking by. Same hair, same clothes, same calm expression. She laughed, assuming it was a trick of the glass. But when she turned back to her work, there she was again, her double, shelving books just feet away. It wasn't a hallucination. She could hear the thud of books being placed, the slight clearing of a throat. When she confronted the duplicate, it nodded politely and continued shelving, unbothered, unaware that anything was wrong. Word spread quickly. Tom Bradley spotted himself mowing a lawn on the opposite side of town. Sarah Winston met her own reflection in the grocery store aisle, both reaching for the same box of cereal. These weren't twins or imposters. They were perfect replicas, down to scars, birthmarks, and dental records. Medical scans confirmed it. Same DNA, same fingerprints. They even answered personal questions with the exact memories of their originals. Yet they behaved independently, going about their lives on eerily familiar routines. Dr. Michael Ross, a quantum physicist brought in from Northwestern, was baffled. The duplicates weren't projections. They cast shadows. Their bodies registered heat. They interacted with the physical world as if they belonged to it. But then researchers noticed the delay. Every action performed by an original was repeated by their duplicate, precisely 4.7 seconds later. If Rebecca closed a book, her duplicate would close the same title 4 seconds afterward. If Sarah sneezed, her twin sneezed next. Like reality had created cached copies, playing slightly out of sync. Then came the maps. Investigators traced the movements of both originals and duplicates. The doubles were appearing in places their counterparts had been exactly 24 hours earlier. Not random, but calculated. It was as if the town was caught in a feedback loop, replaying the previous day's version of every person, layered over the present. The duplicates remained for 6 days. On the seventh morning, at precisely 7:00 a.m., they flickered. Witnesses described the moment like static on an old TV. Bodies dissolving into pixels, fading into nothing, no screams, no struggle, just gone, and the originals, confused, haunted, left behind. The government moved quickly. Witnesses were relocated, records sealed, but fragments leaked, enough to suggest this wasn't the first occurrence. Other towns, other doubles, always 6 days, always perfect mirrors. What if Millbrook wasn't broken? What if it was displaying a hidden feature of reality, like a software rendering engine that sometimes draws the same object twice? Redundancy, echo, lag. The question that lingered wasn't how the glitch occurred, it was why. Was reality testing something, rehearsing, backing up? And if our world creates duplicates to preserve stability, who's to say we are the originals? Or are we all echoes, repetitions rendered with a delay, living in a world that occasionally forgets which version is real? September 23, 1997. Somewhere above California. Captain David Chen was piloting Flight 447 en route from Seattle to Los Angeles. At 30,000 feet, the sky was crisp, visibility perfect. The hum of engines, the steady rhythm of altitude, a routine flight. Until it wasn't. At 2:14 p.m., just past Fresno, Chen saw something outside the left cockpit window. At first, he thought it was a mirage, light playing tricks in the upper atmosphere. But what he saw was too detailed, too solid. An island, not floating on water, but in the sky. Suspended above the clouds, motionless, massive, an entire landmass the size of Manhattan, complete with trees, buildings, roads, and signs of life. Passengers noticed too. Dozens of voices rose in awe, then confusion. Through binoculars, Chen could make out structures, rooftops, cultivated fields, even what looked like chimneys puffing smoke. Movement suggested people. Human shapes walking between houses, working in gardens, unaware or unconcerned that they were 30,000 feet above the earth. Lisa Parker, a flight attendant, described it as medieval, stone walls, winding streets, like something out of a forgotten storybook. One passenger said someone on the island had waved at the plane. Radar showed nothing. Air traffic control saw only sky. Chen adjusted course, bringing the aircraft within 2 miles. As they approached, the island remained impossibly still, casting a clear shadow on the clouds below. The sun illuminated its eastern face, trees rustling in an invisible wind. It wasn't a hallucination. It was real. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. No fade, no descent, just absence. The passengers gasped. Instruments on board flickered. The plane briefly registered multiple altitudes as if it occupied several locations at once. Radios crackled with static, and then clarity. Normal readings. Empty sky. 2 F-16s, scrambled from nearby airbases, reached the coordinates minutes later. They found nothing. No trace, no turbulence, no explanation. Back on the ground, investigators combed through photos and footage taken by passengers. The images weren't doctored, verified by experts. They showed trees, rooftops, even animals. One video captured a child running near the edge of the island, casting a shadow on open air. What they saw defied physics. A landmass floating with no visible support, immune to gravity, detached from the Earth's crust yet fully formed. What troubled researchers most wasn't the sighting. It was what happened to the aircraft itself. Navigation logs showed impossible readings, suggesting the plane had briefly existed in multiple positions on Earth's grid. Instruments misfired for precisely the duration of the sighting, as if reality itself had been altered in the presence of the island. And then, stability resumed. No damage, no memory among the crew of turbulence or sudden change. whispers began. Not of UFOs, but of programming. What if the island wasn't a place, but a rendered asset? A part of reality mistakenly loaded into the wrong altitude, like a terrain patch in a video game appearing mid-air before the system corrects itself? Others suggested it was a bleed-through from another layer of reality, another save state running parallel, briefly intersecting with ours. One pilot reviewing the footage said it best. It looked too perfect, like something still being tested. A floating island, complete with trees and smoke, waving strangers in shadows. For a moment the sky opened, and something impossible hovered above our world. And then, just like a cursor blinking on an empty screen, it vanished, leaving behind the question, what else floats unseen above us, waiting to be rendered into view? December 14, 2005. Grand Central Terminal, New York City. The winter crowd was dense, coats brushing shoulders, voices echoing beneath vaulted ceilings. Commuters streamed through marble corridors, a daily choreography of movement. And then, without warning, reality fractured. John Stevenson, an unremarkable office worker, was walking through the main concourse when he passed directly through a marble pillar. Not around it. Through it. Witnesses described it like watching a ghost become solid halfway through an apparition. His body disappeared into the column as though it were made of mist, then emerged intact on the other side. Dozens of people screamed. Some ran, others froze, eyes wide, unable to process what they'd seen. Security cameras caught everything. Frame by frame, Stevenson approaches the column. His coat ripples slightly. Then his torso vanishes into stone. In the next instant, he's stepping out the far side, blinking in confusion. He hadn't noticed at first. It felt like walking through warm syrup, he later said. I could see the insides of the column, metal, wires, veins of stone, like I was passing through a body made of light. Officer Maria Rodriguez, standing just feet away, ran to him immediately. He was solid, normal, alive. Medical tests revealed no trauma. X-rays showed no abnormalities. But electromagnetic scans detected strange energy signatures radiating from his body. Fields that pulsed erratically and lingered for hours after the event. Scientists were baffled. The pillar itself had exhibited odd behavior for weeks. Maintenance workers reported that it occasionally shimmered, felt soft to the touch, or gave off faint vibrations. One technician said the column felt hollow one day and dense like lead the next. Dr. Patricia Kim, a physicist from Columbia University, analyzed the footage. Her report was chillingly precise. Stevenson and the marble occupied the same space for 2.3 seconds. This violates the Pauli exclusion principle. It should not be possible. And yet it happened. Stevenson later described lingering effects. For days afterward, he said he could still feel the column. Even blocks away, he sensed its shape inside him, like an invisible echo. It was as if part of his body hadn't returned fully, like his atoms were still partially entangled with the structure. Researchers found something else. The data showed that the pillar's internal composition changed subtly after the event. Its density was altered. Electromagnetic instruments recorded shifting pulses. It was almost as if the marble had absorbed something, or released it. Then the pillar began flickering, not visibly, but on certain infrared and ultraviolet spectrums it blinked like a faulty hologram. Maintenance was suspended, the area roped off. Officials refused to comment, but rumors spread among staff. The pillar was no longer fully there. The term people began to use was phase walking, as if Stevenson had briefly existed out of sync with our plane of reality, as if solid matter can sometimes forget to be solid, as if the physics we trust are only as consistent as the system behind them allows. A glitch? A portal? Or simply a failure of rendering? What if walls are only walls because the code says so? And what if, on rare occasions, the code forgets? John Stevenson walked through a solid pillar, and for a fleeting moment he was somewhere between substance and shadow, matter and math. Not a magic trick, not a miracle, just a system error. And in that error, the boundary between real and unreal dissolved. Boyd. What else, then, might we pass through? If the world lets us forget it's supposed to be solid. November 8th, 2012, Cedar Falls, Iowa. 3:17 a.m. Most of the town was asleep when it happened. Streetlights hummed. Wind rattled dry leaves against windows. But beneath the stillness, something fundamental shifted. The reset began at the hospital. Nurses on the night shift walked past a wing that had been demolished the previous afternoon, only to find it fully restored. Walls repainted, equipment humming, even patient records filed neatly in drawers. One nurse fainted, another vomited. They had watched the building come down, and now it stood, untouched. By sunrise, the rest of Cedar Falls realized something was wrong. Construction sites undone. Trash reappeared where it had been cleaned the day before. Park benches were back in their old locations. Litter returned in identical patterns. Graffiti that had been scrubbed away now marked brick walls as if it had never left. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't time travel. It was something stranger. The entire town had reverted, every object, building, and digital file, exactly to its state 24 hours earlier. Sarah Mitchell had painted her house green on November 7th. On the morning of the 8th, it was blue again. Not overpainted, not reversed. The green had never existed. Chemical analysis showed the blue paint had aged 24 hours, faded, chipped, weathered, perfectly consistent with its condition from the previous morning. At City Hall, computers glitched. Digital documents created the day before had vanished. Files updated on the 7th reverted to their earlier versions. Timestamps confirmed it. All data had been overwritten at 3:17 a.m., not deleted, replaced. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a temporal physicist from the University of Iowa, arrived within hours. She reviewed the evidence and came to a radical conclusion. Cedar Falls had been restored from a previous save state. Reality had used a backup. Even biological systems reverted. Trees trimmed the day before regrew broken branches. A man who had cut his hand the previous evening woke up uninjured, the scar gone. A woman who had been 9 weeks pregnant was suddenly 8 weeks again. Her ultrasound, taken on the 7th, was gone. The one from the 6th was back in her file, but the reset had limits. A construction project that straddled the border between Cedar Falls and neighboring Waterloo was only partially undone. The dividing line was precise, a street that now featured half-poured concrete on one side and completed pavement on the other. Reality had drawn a border. Everything within city limits had rolled back. Everything outside remained unchanged. Officials denied it, but those who lived through it knew the town had glitched. Walsh's confidential report described the event as an instance of environmental rollback, like a corrupted program restored from its last working version. Her chilling theory? These resets might not be isolated. They could be increasing. Other small towns. Same 3:17 a.m. Timestamp. Same 24-hour reversal. Same quiet erasure of evidence. She wondered if the system behind reality was debugging itself, restoring safe versions after unknown errors. But to what end? What if our lives are saved and restored without us ever knowing? What if each day we wake into a world that might not be the first version of today? The Cedar Falls reset wasn't just a glitch. It was a reveal, a hint that the universe keeps backups. And sometimes it hits undo. April 22, 2008, Bakersfield, California. It began as a flicker. Maria Santos was walking past the Kern County Museum when she noticed something strange. The building shimmered, not in the heat haze kind of way, but like a digital image blinking between frames. One moment, solid brick. The next, transparent lines, glowing blue outlines where walls should be. She rubbed her eyes, looked again. The museum had turned into a wireframe. Not long after, the glitch spread. 4 blocks of downtown Bakersfield transformed into a living 3D blueprint. Buildings lost their textures, revealing their inner skeletons as geometric grids. Cars on the street appeared as hollow shapes, frames of chrome and motion. Even people flickered, bones and circulatory systems mapped like anatomical models in glowing white. Photographer Alex Chen was nearby. He captured it all. His photos showed buildings rendered in perfect vector precision. Walls became planes, curves, arcs, and points. Doors were rectangles within rectangles. The world looked as if someone had turned off the skin of reality and left only the digital bones beneath. It wasn't just visual. These wireframe structures were real, tangible. People walked into buildings that looked like nothing more than translucent scaffolding. Cars continued to operate, their passengers visible through invisible doors. Physics didn't fail, only appearance. The phenomenon pulsed outward in concentric rings, like a rendering engine reprocessing an area on the fly. It started at the museum and moved outward, each building affected in sequence, as if cued in a processing task. Then came the anomalies. Some buildings revealed structural elements that didn't match any known architecture, corridors that didn't exist, wiring patterns unfamiliar to engineers. And the people, their wireframe forms displayed more than bone and blood. Strange networks, glimmering threads, paths no doctor could name, like anatomy from a different design standard. Dr. Robert Kim from UC Berkeley reviewed the footage. "These are not hallucinations," he said. "They follow software modeling principles. We are looking at real-time wireframe rendering, exactly as it appears in computer graphics before textures and lighting are applied." His conclusion: reality had exposed its development layer. The glitch lasted 47 minutes. Then everything returned. Instantly, the outlines filled in, colors returned, textures reappeared. Bakersfield was solid again, but not unchanged. People stood in silence, shaken. Some wept. Others stared at their hands, as if trying to confirm they were fully there. The government's explanation? None. No comment, no investigation made public. But whispers emerged that what Bakersfield experienced wasn't unique. That wireframe events had occurred elsewhere, always brief, always localized, always denied. Chen's photographs disappeared from online archives days later, but copies remained. Proof that for nearly an hour the facade of reality peeled away, revealing the raw geometry beneath. A rendering error. Not random, not spiritual, not artistic. A system glitch. The kind seen in 3D environments when hardware lags. When assets load in the wrong order, when the skin of the world falls away to reveal math. So what is solid? What is finished? What if we live inside a world that renders in real time, drawing us from code to light, from wireframe to flesh? And what happens when the system forgets to finish the rendering? For 47 minutes, Bakersfield wasn't broken. It was honest. It showed us what we are beneath the textures. Structured light, digital scaffolding, running on a program we don't understand. And then it was gone. But the question remained, what's real, the finished product or the frame beneath? July 7th, 2016. Phoenix, Arizona. Riverside Shopping Mall. It was late morning, the food court bustling with noise, frying oil, laughing kids, retail chatter. And then, without warning, things began to disappear. Not stolen, not broken, not removed. Deleted. At 11:43 a.m., shoppers reported the sudden vanishing of items from storefront displays. Mannequins blinked out of existence. Potted plants dissolved into air. Security guard Robert Martinez was on patrol when entire food court tables began fading, edge to center, like old photos burning from the outside in. "It was like watching a hard drive empty itself," he later said. "Objects just de-rendered." The pattern was precise. Decorative items vanished first. Planters, signs, kiosks, then furniture, then walls. Whole storefronts collapsed into nothingness, leaving white, featureless space in their place. Floor tiles rearranged automatically to fill gaps, like the building was healing from inside out. And then the people started disappearing. A child mid-bite, a cashier mid-sentence. No screams, no flashes of light, just absence. Even stranger, no one seemed to remember them. Shoppers who had just spoken to someone moments before now drew blanks. "I think there was a woman here," one man stammered. "Or maybe not." Security footage showed individuals vanishing cleanly from frames, leaving gaps in motion and conversation like a poorly edited video. Dr. Angela Foster, a quantum physicist from Arizona State University, was already nearby. She arrived within the hour, and what she witnessed unsettled even her. The disappearances followed a strict logic, starting from least essential to most: benches, trash cans, then signage, escalators, then structural elements. But load-bearing walls remained. Air conditioning units remained. Bathrooms remained. It was as if reality itself was optimizing, clearing cache. And it wasn't random. Footage revealed the despawn effect moved through the mall in a perfect grid, chunk by chunk. Each section faded methodically, like segments of computer memory being purged. Foster noted that the pattern mirrored memory deallocation processes in digital systems. "This wasn't collapse," she said. "It was intentional, selective, like the simulation needed more space and cleared unused assets." The event lasted 2 hours and 34 minutes. Roughly 40% of the mall's contents vanished. Then it stopped, not faded, not reversed, just ended. The remaining structures were pristine, stable, but the mall felt empty. Off, like a shell of its former self. And the records? Gone. Inventory systems updated automatically, removing mention of lost items. Financial records corrected themselves. Supplier contracts adjusted. It was as if those objects, those people, those histories had never existed, not even errors, just absence. Clean. Officials offered no explanation. No missing persons were acknowledged. Witnesses were interviewed, then relocated. Foster's research was quietly retracted. But the implications lingered. This wasn't a haunting. This wasn't imagination. This was a despawn event, like in a video game when objects are culled to free up processing power. So what was the mall being optimized for? What else might be deallocated next? And if people can be removed with no trace, no memory, how many have already been erased? Not by fate, not by time, but by a system cleaning house. And if it can despawn the world around us, can it despawn us? Are we permanent or merely assets waiting to be cleared? March 3, 2019, Burlington, Vermont. It was a Sunday morning when Emma Rodriguez noticed something odd. She was walking through the downtown square, sipping coffee, when she saw a man check his watch. Nothing unusual until he did it again. 12 minutes later. Same spot, same motion, same puzzled glance at the sky. Then she noticed the woman at the flower shop window, repeating the same phrases about tulips to each passerby. Her hand lifted, pointed at the same bouquet. Her voice never changed. Then came the elderly man on the park bench, feeding pigeons. Same handful, same gestures, same birds. Emma, a college student studying behavioral psychology, began filming, documenting. At first, she thought it was performance art or a prank. But as the hours passed, the pattern became undeniable. Burlington was glitched. Roughly 200 residents were repeating identical routines, moving in loops, speaking in pre-written dialogue, interacting with the world like characters in a simulation. They followed invisible paths that never crossed. Their motions lacked variation. Their speech lacked depth. They were NPCs. When questioned, they responded with canned lines. "I'm just enjoying the day," said one man, 5 times in a row. Another woman, when asked where she was going, replied, "Just taking a walk," her smile never changing. Emma brought the footage to Dr. Sarah Chen, a behavioral psychologist at the University of Vermont. Intrigued, Chen began studying the affected individuals. Brain scans revealed something shocking: identical neural rhythms across all subjects. Not similar, identical, as if their minds were broadcasting the same program. Surveillance footage from across the city showed something stranger. The NPC individuals never intersected. Their routes were perfectly timed to avoid each other, like characters on non-colliding animation paths. Their behavior resembled crowd simulations used in video game development: limited responses, optimized movement, basic immersion. Then, the rhythm broke. At 12:13 p.m. on the 6th day, the routines ended. The affected people stopped mid-action, looked around, and resumed normal behavior. They had no memory of the past week. When shown footage of their repetition, they grew confused, anxious. "What do you mean that was me?" one woman asked. "I don't remember doing that." EEG scans returned to normal. Unique brain waves replaced the synchronized patterns. Their autonomy had returned. But the pattern didn't stop with Burlington. Dr. Chen began collecting reports. Small college towns, isolated neighborhoods, always lasting 6 days, always around the same number of people, always a clean exit, and always denied. Theories emerged quietly. Some believed it was psychological, a response to stress or collective boredom. But the precision said otherwise. This wasn't random. It was resource management. What if, in moments of low activity, the simulation streamlines behavior, reduces complexity to save power? What if some people are placed in standby, looping actions, holding space, until more processing is needed? What if we've all been NPCs at times and never noticed? The Burlington glitch didn't just mimic programming, it exposed it. For 6 days, people became scripts. The question isn't how, it's when. When will it happen again? And will we know if it's us? Somewhere between anomaly and pattern, the world blinked again. This time, it was Cedar Falls, again, and then Millbrook, and then Bakersfield, Burlington, Taos, each glitch leaving behind breadcrumbs, each incident not isolated but echoing. Together, they began to draw a shape. A story with 10 fractured chapters that point toward one unsettling possibility: that reality is not fixed, it's processed. All 10 events, from teleportation to temporal loops, duplicate people, to rendering failures, reveal a pattern disturbingly familiar to anyone who's ever debugged a piece of software. A flicker here, a rollback there, delays, memory leaks, skipped frames. These are not ghost stories. They're system behaviors. Each one exhibits traits of computer logic: repeatability, localized impact, geometric precision. The soldier who blinked across the Pacific. The floating island rendered mid-air like an asset loaded into the wrong coordinate. The town that reverted to an earlier save. The shopping mall that thinned its memory by despawning reality itself. Even the people, duplicated, phased, reset, function like digital instances. Assets behaving correctly until the program fails to distinguish between versions, or until the routine is interrupted by outside influence, an observer who sees too clearly, who interferes. We think of reality as continuous, but these glitches suggest it's modular. That time, gravity, and even identity may be functions, capable of being paused, modified, or rewritten. That the world around us isn't collapsing, but recalculating, and what if it's not just a metaphor? If reality operates like a simulation, what's running it? Who or what is the architect? Is there intent behind these corrections? Or are we watching an aging system begin to falter, like an old program accumulating bugs? We often comfort ourselves with the idea that science will catch up, that one day these glitches will be explained by physics we haven't yet discovered. But what if the explanation is technological, not natural? What if our world is a rendering, a beautifully crafted environment built atop rules of execution we're only just beginning to glimpse? Perhaps our physics aren't absolute laws, but approximations, clever illusions for user experience. And perhaps the cracks are growing wider. The evidence is mounting, and with each event, the veil thins. Buildings rendered in wireframe, days that repeat, people who vanish. Whole towns reverting to a previous state like an autosave. The question now is not whether it's happening, but why? Why now? Are these errors signs of collapse or of testing? And if someone, somewhere, is watching this simulation from the outside, what are they adjusting? Each glitch leaves behind a feeling, not fear, exactly, but something more subtle. The sensation that we're waking up in the middle of a process we can't name. And once you've seen the seams, it's hard not to look for them, in the corner of your vision, in the silence between seconds. A world that sometimes stutters, that pauses, that forgets itself, and maybe that remembers you. The signs are subtle, but once noticed, impossible to unsee. The flicker in the corner of your eye. The repeated phrase from a stranger's lips. A day that feels like déjà vu stretched too thin. These are the moments we usually dismiss, glitches in memory, tricks of light, coincidence. But what if they aren't? What if we are brushing up against the edges of something real, something beneath? In the days following the Burlington event, Dr. Sarah Chen continued her work in secret. She cross-referenced brainwave data, gravitational anomalies, and spatial inconsistencies across dozens of locations tied to reality disturbances. She found overlapping frequencies, not just similar patterns, but identical signal structures across separate incidents. Signal echoes with a repeating structure, as if stitched into the underlying architecture of reality, a kind of code. Elsewhere, pilots whispered about impossible coordinates, navigation systems that looped them into skies already crossed. Town clerks noticed dates duplicating in digital systems, calendars showing days twice. Children reported dreams of places they'd never been, describing them with eerie precision, down to faded wallpaper and a smell of dust warmed by sunlight. It's as if the system, whatever it is, has begun to bleed through or lose containment. One theory, circulated in hidden circles of physicists and engineers, is that we're approaching a processing threshold, a point where the system must decide whether to evolve or collapse, where the memory load of reality exceeds its runtime efficiency. And when that happens, optimizations occur. Prune what's unnecessary. Render fewer variables. Loop instead of simulate. Despawn instead of update. But what if some of us, by chance or design, retain awareness between revisions? What if the ones who see the pattern are artifacts, debuggers, or worse, bugs? You might feel it, that sense that something is wrong but unnameable. The uncanny rhythm of a world that occasionally resets, duplicates, simplifies. The moments where people behave like programs, where buildings seem less solid, where time becomes elastic. Not every glitch is dramatic. Some are so quiet they echo only inside you. Perhaps we were never meant to see them. But the question lingers, Are these events increasing because the simulation is degrading or because it's evolving? Could the anomalies be part of a larger rewrite, an update rolling out in patches? Are we living inside a beta test? What happens to data that becomes self-aware? Does it get deleted, promoted, observed? The files on Gil Perez, the Taos Gravity Holiday, the floating island, the despawned mall, all of them point to a system trying to maintain consistency. But cracks are forming. And maybe, just maybe, we're not here to be players. Maybe we're part of the code itself. Some lines are stable, others are testing boundaries. And in the quiet moments between updates, we hear it, the hum of something greater, a process still running, still watching, still debugging us. It ends where it began, in a question. What is real? Over the course of these stories, 10 events, 10 fractures in the ordinary, we've traveled from a soldier vanishing across oceans to a town caught in a cosmic undo. We've floated above the clouds on phantom islands, walked through marble as if it were mist, and watched people repeat themselves like lines of code. Each tale brought us closer to a strange and sobering idea. That our world, our lives, might not be grounded in physics alone, but in something programmable, something mutable, a system. And systems can fail, but they can also be maintained, patched, optimized. Everything we've seen, the loops, resets, duplicates, phase shifts, and visual breakdowns, points toward a world not collapsing but recalculating, not haunted but structured, not magical but manufactured. If this is a simulation, it is not perfect. It glitches. It reveals its scaffolding, but it also adapts. The question now is not whether reality is real. It's what we mean when we say real. If your memories, your feelings, your pain and joy and curiosity are experienced, then they are real, regardless of the substrate. Even if we live in code, the stories we live still matter. We laugh, we mourn, we ask questions, we seek meaning. A simulation doesn't make us less human. It makes the mystery deeper. So perhaps the purpose of these glitches is not to terrify, but to remind. That certainty is an illusion. That permanence is a story we tell ourselves to stay calm. But also, maybe, these breaks in the world are invitations. To look closer, to wake up, to pay attention to the seams. Because in those seams we find wonder. Not everything that stutters is broken. Sometimes it's trying to speak. Sometimes it's a mirror held up to the face of reality itself, saying, "Look, you are not alone in your questioning. You were made to ask." And somewhere, behind the glass, beyond the blink, beneath the rendering, someone or something might just be listening. Not to control, but to understand. Because if this world is a simulation, it is the most beautiful kind. Flawed, mysterious, full of ghosts and code and quiet human longing. And somewhere inside it, you are real. Because you are wondering. And that might be the truest thing of all.